I will introduce
Okay.
Carol Armstrong, not Carol, Ashmore, get the right name, sorry Carol, who's going to do our presentation this morning on space-based solar power. Is that an accurate title?
Yeah, just a moment. Okay. The presentation is going to be on China's claims that
Okay.
they are going to be within a very short time frame, within the next 20 to 25 years, having a solar power from space capability in geosynchronous orbit and also a moon base manned. And these are rather extraordinary claims, and they run counter to some of the things that we are seeing about the Chinese economy. So I thought I would just put this up there and give people a chance to argue about it. Now, let's see. I am going to have to okay, now, are you guys seeing that?
Yes.
Oh, lovely. I actually managed to share it. Okay. Um, China claims solar power from space and moon base build in 10 to 25 years. And I make the sub comment, this one looks serious. For background, 4 years ago, I gave a presentation on the concept of solar power from space to this group. The reaction was interesting, but it's sci-fi stuff, probably in 100 years. A couple of months ago, during Jason's presentation on dredging and burning methane ice from the seafloor, I suggested that solar power from space would be cheaper and cleaner. Again, the reaction was too far in the future. The situation I'm seeing today, and this has only been true for the last couple of months, no, maybe about 5 months, is that China expects to have this infrastructure in place along with a manned moon base within 25 years. That's just extraordinary to me. But there have been several things about these announcements that have caused me to take them seriously. And this is saying, I'm going to play you some videos talking about what China claims they're going to do. And I'd like you to note the things that make this seem like realistic prediction rather than pie in the sky sci-fi. First one is that announcements are made by named scientists with close government ties. The plans use existing named rocket technology. In other words, they are not depending on our launch capabilities going to get better. And the time scale is short. So,
Carol, how do you want to handle comments or questions?
well,
Raise your hand and we'll call on you at the end of the video.
yeah,
Okay.
raise your hand and we'll call on you at the end of each video. So I think I need to unshare and let, just a moment here. Humbug. Where do I go to unshare? Okay, do we have questions or comments on that? Or can we go on to the second video?
My hand was up 5 minutes ago.
Okay, I can't see your hand.
I know. I had to fiddle around and yeah. Who's doing?
Carol,
Ian, you're
you-
first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Tom. So am I missing something? Apparently, it's early out here. How does a geosynchronous satellite panels give you 24 hours a day of solar? Is China now like the British Empire? The sun never sets on China?
no,
No, you have to put more than one station up. In other words, if you put one up directly above China, it would take care of, a big chunk of.
And the rest of us will get free power when they're sleeping, right?
You need at least three of them. Arthur C. Clarke wrote this out in the 1960s.
All right.
A station in geosynchronous orbit looks as though it just hangs above because it's following the Earth's rotation. So if it always stays in the same place above the Earth, because that's what a geosynchronous orbit is. It is 24 hours as the Earth rotates beneath it, so it's always the same place above. You'd have to have 3 of them to give everybody.
no. Carol, you could also have 3 of them where they first beam the power to the one that's in geosynchronous orbit above China, and then retransmit that beam to China.
Okay, so how do you get the station above China to give the US electricity?
Oh, yes, if China were going to provide worldwide energy, that would certainly make sense. But potentially, you could have China providing the power to a particular location by retransmitting the energy from the solar array to the station in geosynchronous orbit above China, and then retransmit it to China. That would probably be where you would start if you were going to start small and grow the system and also sell power around the world.
Well, I'd say if you want to power it around the world, you really need 3 of them.
In terms of Jack's question on chat, oh, come on.
Geosynchronous orbit is really big. There's lots of space in there.
We have 2 people with their hands up. Why are we going to chat?
We have 3.
Mine just fell down. Mine just
Oh.
was taken down. It doesn't stay up. There, I had mine up.
Tom,
Yeah.
are you calling on people?
Yeah, I think that Warren, you're probably next because I know
Okay.
David wasn't next.
Well, I have to say it sounds like pie in the sky. But most importantly, how if they could do this, it would be a centralized location on Earth where it would be all that power would go. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, then it's still a transmission problem. Is there any indication that they're working on transmission systems that would allow the distribution of this kind of energy? And it's, yeah, I mean, if you didn't, I mean, it's very possible they haven't even thought about that. I don't. Thank you.
David, go ahead.
Okay, in terms of Jack's question about what's the maximum proposed distance of effective energy transmission? In space, a laser can transmit energy essentially as far as until it hits something, until it hits the antenna that's absorbing the energy.
Or the atmosphere?
Through
If
the
we look
atmosphere,
at
that's
you look at some
significantly
of the
more limited.
future in the future videos, it describes the fact that using laser transmission would be stopped by heavy cloud cover, whereas microwave transmission would not. Those are the 2 possibilities for getting the energy to Earth.
Carole,
Yeah.
potentially you can have microwave laser transmission where you have a focused beam of wavicles in the microwave range.
That's called a maser, actually, not a laser.
Thank you. Sorry.
You're right. You're right. I forgot that masers came first. But at least that is addressed in future videos, that they feel that it's going to be microwave because laser transmission would be stopped by heavy cloud cover.
They're talking about environmental advantages, but they don't say anything about the potential environmental unexpected side effects, consequences. There may be some. They don't say anything about the estimated costs.
Well, remember, there are 3 more videos
Okay.
that talk more
do
about.
any of them address the potential costs of such a system?
I think so.
Okay.
And
then I'll lower my hand and wait to see those.
We do have 2 more hands. So Tom, go ahead.
Oh my. So we've got this giant beam in space and it's pouring down through the atmosphere to the receiver on Earth.
Right.
What happens to the atmosphere in the beam? It's going to soak up some of that power. And you are going to have, depending on how much power is going through, you might have tornadoes around the beam.
Well, I have heard, and this has been in this is not covered in any of these videos, but I have heard that the beam is such that a bird can fly through it and not be roasted. You know, the bird can actually fly out.
I understand that, but it's going to heat that part of the atmosphere. Not to 300 degrees, but it might raise it 5 degrees. That part of the atmosphere is going to raise, being hot. And then there's going to be inflow under it. But setting that aside, we've got this giant maser in orbit. What if we aim it at New York City instead of its proper depository? Intentionally or not?
Well, you couldn't hit New York with anything that was in geosynchronous orbit over China.
But we're going to have them all over the place collecting energy and sending it to the geosynchronous thing. So instead of sending it to the geosynchronous hub, they just send it down to
No,
New
the
York City.
collection is all going to be, I believe that this thing is like 5 kilometers in extent, and the collection will all be there.
Well, that's
Now,
what the desired
fortunately,
collection will be. But what if it accidentally squirts off to the side a couple of 100 feet?
it's
I don't expect you to have answers to these things. I'm just
right.
I'm throwing out what ifs because this.
Okay.
Mhm.
Next.
How about we play the next video?
Well, let me ask one more question.
I would say that these questions have been
Please,
asked. that
Eric,
were
please raise your hand.
necessary. Yeah.
My
Wait.
first question is, I'm not sure why you would need 3 of these in orbit. A geosynchronous orbit is about 25,000 miles above Earth. And
22,300.
right. And you will be in Earth's shadow only for a short time with one of them. Maybe you would need 2 if you want completely continuous.
No. But because it is geosynchronous, it rotates as the Earth rotates,
Yeah.
and it always hangs above.
Yeah, I know
place.
that. But it won't be in Earth's shadow for very long because it's so far away.
It won't be in Earth's shadow at all.
Huh?
Well, it depends on what kind of geosynchronous orbit you want to put it in.
And my other question is, as we keep putting more and more satellites up there, especially with Musk's type of communication satellites that he wants to flood the near orbit area with, there's going to be problems with that.
Right, but
And
remember,
that will create
geosynchronous
conflict.
orbit is way higher than.
Yeah, I'm
Musk is
not talking about
doing that.
colliding. I'm talking about interference with the beam or the beam hitting another satellite. That will be that's a potential source of conflict. And one more thing, of course, you know about microwave ovens, right? Depending on the frequency of the transmitted beam, you could be roasting a lot of things. And now you say it won't. So I'm not sure what frequencies they're talking about in transmission. I'm hoping some of these videos coming up is going to answer that question.
Well, as I say, I have seen other descriptions of this type of setup that say that a bird can fly through the beam and not be
Mhm.
harmed, let alone roasted.
Okay, David.
So
Yeah, it's fairly clear that the devil is in the details, and they're not telling us enough details on this video for us to understand all the details.
possibly we can go on to the other videos and
Yeah,
they will
that
supply some.
probably would make sense.
We-
But there was a point that somebody sort of passed over with this particular claim is that the power level would be similar to all the oil that we're using. That's a huge deal. And they quoted a square kilometer of collector. That's a huge deal. And because it would be rotating around with the Earth, the focus of the collector would have to be changing all the time. Essentially, you're talking a two-axis tracker in space to keep the solar collector focused on the sun while it's rotating around with the Earth in orbit. This is not trivial.
Now,
There are lots of serious engineering development and efforts involved between here and there over the next whatever time frame they're talking about. And if you think about the challenge once you get the beam back to Earth,
Once you get to what?
Once you get the microwave beam back to Earth, once you absorb all that energy in an antenna, you still have to distribute it to all the various places you want to use it in China. So my suspicion is that distributed solar collectors and batteries would be cheaper and easier to do than all of this effort in space. But that's just a suspicion, that's just an intuition at this point, if you will. And my engineering intuition has not been highly paid over the last 50 years. So take it with the grain of salt that I'm providing it with.
Yeah, we all want to hear the next video, but real quickly, this is why I became an engineer and not a scientist. Engineering is what makes the world work. Science is another thing. And we have no power problem. We have a transmission problem, and I'll shut up.
Consider the Manhattan Project.
Of course.
A lot of engineering done by scientists.
Mhm.
I'm a scientist and an engineer. Yeah, I get it.
Well,
I think it's difficult to be one without being the other.
You need both. You need both.
oh, no. I mean, you wouldn't trust Fermi to come up with the mechanism for getting a critical mass.
I'll go back further. We'd be in the Bronze Age without engineering 10, I don't know, whatever, 1,000 years ago.
But I am suggesting that there are people who do both.
Absolutely. Let's not get, that's a whole other
But
discussion.
anyway,
Have you guys ever watched The Big Bang Theory? Scientists versus engineers. But anyway, it's funny.
Let's
Next
move
video,
on.
please.
Yes. Eric?
Well, scientists discover the laws of nature or try to, and engineers then apply these laws for some more practical purpose, such as, transmitting and, changing and transmitting energy for useful purposes for people.
I think
But
we're
it's like
It can be both.
said,
Let's not argue about that. I made
Well,
a
it's
presentation
nothing
on
to
this
argue.
less
That's
than a
the
year
simple.
ago.
Those are the definitions.
Let's go ahead.
Very simple.
I only have one comment on that last video, which is kind of interesting. He actually pronounced kilometer correctly a couple times. Sometimes he said kilometer, which is wrong, and sometimes he said kilometer. An ohmmeter is a device for measuring things, like thermometer, barometer, speedometer, hygrometer, manometer. That's a device for measuring something. If you want to specify a length, it's kilometer, centimeter, millimeter, megameter, nanometer. So not kilometer, it's kilometer. No more questions, so I guess we're ready for the next one.
I'll just comment without raising my hand. Thanks for that explanation, Tom. I really appreciate that. I know I've mispronounced kilometer. Thank you.
Most people do for some reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's a foreign pronunciation that people have taken on here for English.
well, I'm sorry, I think it's a nuclear thing. It's the way you pronounce it. How is Paris pronounced? Cairo, Cairo.
Not a protest.
Okay, are you ready for the next one, Carole?
yes. I think this is the one where we end up with some Elon Musk quotes.
Well, this will not be the last. This will be the second to last. It's called It's Over Now.
Yes,
Okay.
Well, by the way, there's
the
another.
last one is a Peter Zeihan one.
Okay.
So
Oh, this has Elon's face on it.
I was going to say there's another word that kind of emphasizes what I just said about kilometer. A micrometer is a device for measuring very short distances. A micrometer is a length.
mhm.
David, do you have a question?
I actually liked this video, and my understanding is that China was not allowed to participate in the International Space Station because the U.S. Congress said that we would pull funding if they were allowed to participate. So the United States has been throwing its weight around over the last 20 years in the direction of creating a new Cold War rather than making a shared project of space.
Okay, I have a comment about mining on the moon and that type of thing. There's nothing that I know of that prohibits that. There is a treaty from 55 years ago or more that I put information about in the comments, the International Treaty on Space that prohibits any nation from claiming sovereignty over any extraterrestrial object. So we can't own Mars or a portion of it, or the moon or a portion of it, and claim it for the US. Everything's supposed to be neutral. And the other main thing that it does is it prohibits development of weapons out there, specifically nuclear weapons. So I think we're getting very close worldwide to seeing some imminent violations of that treaty. Just about everyone back then signed it, including Russia, China, and the US. So we'll see what happens. Go ahead, Dean.
What treaty hasn't been violated over the last 2,000 years? When it comes to I'm not bragging. None of you guys have spent 2 years in Vietnam in combat. Your enemy is your enemy. China said 50 years ago, they stomped the shoe on the table at the UN and said, "We will bury you."
That was Russia.
That was Russia.
I understand that. Get the metaphor. They are doing that. All right. So they said 50 years ago that they will dominate the world, and they're doing it. And when you go into the ring against a 500-pound sumo wrestler and you weigh 180, you better bring all you got. That's my comment. And I don't hate the Chinese, but you have to. In Vietnam, I didn't hate the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, but I had to hate them in order to kill them. That's the world, my friends.
Chris.
If human nature hasn't changed in the last 2,000 years, and if Thucydides is right, the Greek historian who wrote about the Peloponnesian Wars, then the situation that leads to conflict is when a country or a group that is in power is being challenged by a new upstart company for their number one position, which is what happened in the Peloponnesian Wars. Then that usually leads to conflict. And there have been, if you look at history over the years, that has been a recipe for repeated and repeated conflict. So unless human nature has changed since the time of Euclides, about 400 BC, or unless human beings have become wiser, then if Euclides were a member of the Minnesota Futurists, he would come down on the side of conflict rather than cooperation.
Well, okay. All of this talk of China's putting up a manned moon base and China putting up a significant geosynchronous power station is very recent. It all seems to date back to a lecture from last October by the rocket scientist, and God forbid I can pronounce the Chinese, Long Lehao, um, in which he unveiled these various plans. So the whole China claiming that they're going to do this kind of thing is quite recent. It dates back to October. And the thing that makes me wonder about it is quite a few of our geopolitical economists have been predicting a major crash of the Chinese economy sometime in the next 10 to 20 years. And pointing out all kinds of information that seems to indicate this is true. Now, I can't quite see China with a crashing economy having the wherewithal to get into this kind of activity. On the other hand, I do remember that Russia's attempt to beat the US in the space race was a significant factor in, sorry, old SSSR, the Soviet Union's attempt to beat the US in the space race was a significant factor in the breakup of the Soviet Union. And I suppose we might be looking at the same sort of thing, that they're throwing everything into space, and that might contribute to the downfall of their economy. I don't know, are all of you people familiar with the economic predictions of China's collapse, or should I play the last video and let you hear some of it? Anybody?
We do have time to see it.
I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, we
Could
have
I
one
just
other,
say
one
one
other
other
question.
thing?
Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the last few videos we've been looking at Long March 9, which is going to be used, I guess, for the solar space station, but also for the lunar base. So it looks like their timeline is until 2029 when they do their first launch. 2030 to 35 would be when they're establishing the base. Just an interesting point. So SpaceX, their Starship is actually, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen because the last launch didn't go exactly according to plan, but the idea was to do orbital refueling this March 2025, and then having a Starship HLS testing at the end of 2025 without a crew. I guess following up with a crew in 2026. But yeah, we're still, I mean, if there's a race to establishing a lunar base, I think we're still ahead of the Chinese by a number of years. They still have to prove quite a few technologies as well.
We're on the way to establishing a base orbiting the moon, and eventually we plan to have one on the moon.
Oh yeah, well, one other thing is so with the Starship HLS, their plan is to have the rocket on the moon and then tip one over and turn that into essentially like a base. right? Covering it up with dirt so that way, in case it gets hit by me, there'll be some level of protection. But yeah, I don't know. I think that a lot of the stuff that is coming out of SpaceX is in line with what they could do pretty quickly, actually.
David. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Stan is next.
Well, if I listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson's theory of the space race and how it basically stopped after we went to the moon, he's always emphasized the fact that a geopolitical rationale has to be present for there to be any real motivation to do anything. So it would appear that maybe this newer interest of China would be reasonable incentive for us to try to. It was Sputnik in the Russians back in the 50s, and now it's China. Although I would have to say that the evidence of SpaceX's progress with capturing or re-landing, and the success of that is pretty amazing compared to what I've seen China really do so far. So I don't think that we have to be that concerned that they're way ahead of us. But there are lots to be said for their diligence at manufacturing and mass production, which they seem to be very good at, because we gave them essentially a lot of our manufacturing processes. We said, let's make you the blue collar of America, and they kind of did that. We also let them pollute a lot of their air and their water. Well, we didn't have to do that as well. So I don't know. As far as I don't know what the real reasons for China not being included on the space station, but I assumed that it has to do with the concern about intelligence or rights of ideas, patents, and that kind of thing.
David.
I got distracted by Stan's comments. The short answer is it's complicated. And it's not necessarily a simple case of cause and effect. I had something else, but I've forgotten it.
Okay. Let us know when you think of it. Jack.
I mean, yeah, so there was an amendment, what is it called? The Wolf Amendment that was passed, preventing the Chinese from being able to participate in some of the programs that were involved, that NASA's involved with. But I think like there's a number of reasons why. But I mean, right now, I think really the opinion is that the Chinese version of NASA, I think it's called the CSN, they're essentially kind of perceived as a military branch of the Chinese government, whereas like NASA is more. I mean, it's also an extension of the government, obviously, but it's more like civilian driven to a certain extent, and especially the contractors. But it's kind of I think it's a lot of it is perception too, because you've got SpaceX, yeah, they've got Starlink. I mean, any technology or a lot of technologies can be used as something that isn't a weapon and something that is a weapon. And Starlink is a perfect example. I mean, ever since the Ukraine thing, in order to resolve Elon Musk being in the middle of things, whatever, he essentially said, okay, we'll do Space Shield and have the government run that branch, but it's still Starlink satellites. So, but I think like probably it's the overt view that the Chinese are really driving this space program as a military asset of their government, as opposed to what we're doing with NASA.
Oh, took my hand down. Am I next?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I married a Chinese, and she said, never trust the Chinese. And she knows, her observation is that Americans are so gullible.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
that's true. Yeah. Okay, David, have you thought of what you wanted to say before?
Yeah. SpaceX is sort of an American company, but it's not a government run American company. Um,
Well, given Musk's recent cuddling up to
yeah,
Trump.
that may be changing, but
Yes.
it hasn't yet, as far as we know.
Yes, they aren't government run, but they've gotten a lot of government money to
This is
develop
true.
their
Yep.
rocket. I guess we're ready for anything else, Carol.
Well, would you want to take a quick look at the last video, which
Yes.
talks about China's imminent economic collapse
Yeah,
as a
predictions are a little iffy, but yeah, I'd like to hear it.
Rather see Stephen Shu's comments.
I think I just read that or heard that Tesla has laid off 500 employees. And oh, by the way, they're planning to build 10,000 of their Optimus robots this year. In terms of China's inability to manage their economy because of a demographic collapse, if they were able to clone people cheaply and educate people cheaply, that country would be the place I would expect to see that happen first. And they certainly would have the motivation to do it. Whether or not that answers any of Peter Zeihan's questions is an open.
That sounds like another presentation.
Okay, I have just a simple question for Carol. It looked like this video is 2 years old, halfway through Biden's administration. And if that's true, I haven't seen any of the effects yet that Peter Zeihan is predicting. So I don't know if the collapse is really as imminent as Zeihan suggests.
Let's
And
see,
it
we
sounds
could
like,
check when the video was made.
okay. Also, it sounds like we're being set on a similar course here in the US. By controlling the media and information and that kind of stuff. And in many ways, I see parallels with what we're heading toward now and what China's going through.
Yep.
Including decimation of our workforce.
Mhm.
David, I don't quite see what you meant by cloning people would help.
Oh, with the demographic collapse, you can't fix it immediately, but you could fix it 20 years from now, much faster potentially.
Well, I don't see the cloning helps. I mean,
No, probably not. But the cost, state support of women to have children for the state strikes me as a more communist approach than a capitalist approach.
Okay, Carrie.
Yeah, I think this is a symptom of systems that depend on growth, right? Eventually, you're going to start to reach certain limitations, and then we've got to struggle to find ways to work beyond them. And I mean, that's the whole basis of Malthus, right? Who's been wrong over and over and over and over again, but people still worry that, he's going to be wrong until the day he's right. And then we're going to be caught with our pants down, so to speak. One of the things I think that makes this difficult is we're all operating on floating currencies these days. So we're valuing each other's progress in relation to each other. So we could be all communally struggling, but still, as long as we're the cleanest dirty shirt, we feel like things are great until the day it's not. Regarding demographics, I think automation is going to be a really interesting variable to throw in here, because think of where we could be in 20 years, right? Especially in light of all this stuff, we're talking about, having bases on the moon and whatnot, and, alternative sources of energy that are not terrestrial. That changes things. And then finally, these systems are huge, in just terms of momentum. I think it's like the Titanic. You can hit the iceberg and continue on for miles, and nobody really knows that you're kind of sinking. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But it seems like that the regional powers are starting to vie for control for their regions more than some kind of like global domination. Thanks.
Tom.
I'm sorry, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Hey, David.
Me too. Carrie, would you consider doing a presentation on that kind of a economic or monetary issue?
Sure. That could be fun.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
One of the things that I'm interested in, we keep talking about Elon Musk. And I mean, Jeff Bezos has dumped a ton of money into this stuff, and he seems to be running kind of silent and deep at the moment. And I'm wondering what he's got going on, because he was talking about a moon base and whatnot. And I mean, I wouldn't count that guy out at all, but I'm not sure what, did Elon suck up all the talent like early on or what?
Some of the talent's been leaving him. But yeah, Bezos, he was trying to develop a space travel thing, but it seemed to be more centered on tourism rather than space exploration. So I don't know exactly where he's going. Eric.
Oh, well, Zeihan just talks a lot of interesting data about demographics, but he only talks about quantitative demographic changes, not qualitative differences. And even though communism in theory denies human genetic differences, China has always been pretty much among the most racist countries and supremacist. And I guess the parties now, there's one goal is obviously to advance the Chinese domination of the world. But I think most urgently, their priority is to stay in power. So we'll see how that all works out. Remember, Zeihan also was the one who recently predicted Trump would lose in a landslide here. If he can't even predict America's huge, obvious American trends, how could he tell us what's going on in a very secretive, vast, and complex place like China?
Well, he's not the only one. I just picked him as representative.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and he's clever. He has a lot of interesting data about many things. But then I think he's watch Stephen Shu's podcasts about China. He's more intelligent, but he's polymath. He's American, but he speaks in Chinese, and he travels there, and he knows some of the most intelligent people. He communicates with some of the most intelligent people in China. Although in support of the idea that China's sinking, I saw a rumor not confirmed yet that the richest family in China that's endured through the whole communist rule is now moving to Canada, lock, stock, and barrel. So they would probably have as good pretty good insight as anybody about China's future over the next few years. So I want to try to follow that and see if it's true.
I heard the same. Stan. You're muted, Stan.
Sorry about that. Thinking back to my presentation last week, I'm sort of always weary of the idea that there's going to be somebody trying to fearmonger us into spending more money on the military industrial complex in some way, shape, or form. And that's going to be a way for them to secure their jobs, secure their finances, secure their wealth. It's been pretty clear to me that for the most part, throughout the early years of the Cold War, the warnings that we had about the Russians and their ability to do this and that and the other thing were way overblown. And that the bottom line is that it just seems to me like there's so many aspects about this psychological warfare of fear mongering and so forth is such that it's going to just basically suck more finances into the wealthy, into the minority, and have a little bit of, it seems to me like everybody on this planet is suffering from a disproportionate amount of finance being spent on finances that doesn't do anything to support the education and the health and the welfare of the people as well as the planet. And so I'm not sure that I'm very I mean, the idea that we have solar panels and we have wind and we have batteries now, and by batteries I don't mean just the lithium ion. I'm meaning the iron air batteries and some of the flow batteries and so forth. I think that that's a good establishing unit. And when I think of Peter Zeihan, I always try to counteract that with Robert Dorr and Tony Seba, and a little bit more optimistic viewpoint of abundance that we can actually do with the numbers that we know that are true, and that they're absolutely true for everybody else on this planet.
Eric, do you have something, or is your hand still up from before?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's off.
Okay. H. Tom is next one.
A couple of things. There's money in tourism.
Right.
Look at Nepal. People coming to climb Everest or just to look at it, as an example. There's not much money in exploration. You can spend a lot, but you don't get many people to do that. You don't make a profit on it, usually. There's money in treats. Ice cream. There's not much money in broccoli. Although broccoli is probably better for you. China has a bunch of projects going, and if China falls, those projects are going to be half built. And that's going to be a problem. And it's probably also going to be an opportunity for someone, but it's going to be a lot of money. Anyway, the reason I put my hand up was next week, I'm going to talk about China's hydroelectric future. They're building a dam high in the Himalayas, but as I've looked further and further into this, and no. Well, they are doing that. They're building several big dams on the Himalayan plains. And India and Bangladesh are beyond angry about this because it's totally disrupting